Working nights as a security guard in an old office building downtown was uneventful. For the most part, built in the 1970s, the building had aged poorly, its dimly lit hallways and creaking infrastructure a constant reminder of its outdated design. My job involved little more than monitoring a small array of cameras in the lobby and performing occasional patrols of the upper floors. For someone who didn't mind solitude, it was ideal. That Tuesday night began like any other. At around midnight, I noticed something odd on the camera feed. The elevator light was flickering. At first, I brushed it off as another electrical glitch. The maintenance team was notorious for neglecting minor issues, and flickering lights were nothing new. But after a few minutes, the elevator stopped on the 7th floor, the doors sliding open. It stayed there, motionless, with no one in sight. My unease grew. Why would an empty elevator behave like that? Curiosity gnawed at me. Grabbing my flashlight, I rode the elevator up to investigate. As the doors opened, the 7th floor greeted me with dim lighting and eerie silence. The air was stale, as if the floor had been neglected for years. I stepped out cautiously, my footsteps echoing down the long, empty corridor. At the far end of the hallway, the elevator doors remained wide open, their mechanical hum unsettling in the stillness. Despite the stillness, something felt wrong. I couldn't place it, but the hair on my arm stood on end as I walked the length of the hallway. It was like stepping into a vacuum, where even the sound of the air conditioner seemed muted. After a quick inspection, I found nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of movement. No reason for the elevator to stop. Still, a nagging unease settled over me as I pressed the button to return to the lobby. That's when I made the decision to check the rest of the floor, unaware of what awaited me deeper inside. The 7th floor was rarely used, housing old, abandoned office spaces. Dust coated the worn carpet, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. My flashlight beam cut through the dimness as I walked down the hallway, stopping at each door to test the handle. Most were locked, just as they should have been. All except for one, the corner office. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the crack. I hesitated, heart pounding as I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was cold and empty, the kind of cold that seemed to seep into your bones despite the warm night outside. Papers were scattered across an old desk, and a single chair lay overturned in the corner. The walls were bare, save for the faint outlines where frames once hung. As I scanned the room, my flashlight caught something strange on the floor. Footprints in the dust, leading from the desk to the doorway behind me. I froze. Those prints hadn't been there when I entered. My pulse quickened as I backed out of the room, flashlight trembling in my grip. The trail of prints led down the hallway, back toward the waiting elevator. I followed cautiously, every step measured. Halfway down the corridor, a faint sound reached my ears. A low whisper, almost like the rustling of fabric. It came from behind me. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the walls, but the hallway was empty. Nothing moved, yet the whispering persisted, as if the very walls were conspiring against me. The elevator doors behind me suddenly slid shut with a metallic clang, pulling me out of my daze. I rushed to the doors, slamming the button to call it back, but when they opened, the elevator was empty. I decided to retreat to the safety of the lobby, my thoughts racing, determined to review the camera footage and make sense of what had just happened. Back in the lobby, I collapsed into my chair, hands trembling as I rewound the footage from the past 20 minutes. At first, everything appeared normal. The elevator stopping on the 7th floor, me stepping out and walking down the hallway. But then, something caught my eye. A shadow moved in the corner of the frame, faint but unmistakable. A tall, distorted figure darting across the hallway behind me. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen anything like that in person. I continued watching, scrutinizing every second of the footage. When I reached the part where I entered the corner office, the camera feed inexplicably cut to static. For several minutes, there was nothing but white noise, the faint crackle filling the eerie silence of the security room. When the image finally returned, the hallway was empty. The elevator doors were closed, and the footprints I had seen in the dust were gone. It was as if nothing had happened. I replayed the footage 3 times, trying to make sense of it, but each viewing left me with more questions than answers. The shadow, the static, the missing evidence, it all pointed to something beyond my understanding. When my supervisor arrived the next morning, I reported the incident, showing them the footage. They dismissed it as a technical malfunction, blaming the old wiring and outdated equipment. Maintenance inspected the floor and found no evidence of tampering. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that building. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, sent my heart racing. I avoided the 7th floor entirely, refusing to set foot in its haunted silence. To this day, I wonder if something was watching me that night, lurking just out of sight. Whatever it was, I never wanted to meet it again. Working night security at a mid-sized office complex wasn't an exciting job, but it paid the bills. The building was a maze of glass-walled offices, narrow hallways, and a basement level that was strictly off-limits after hours. My instructions were clear: never enter the basement. The door was always locked, and there were no cameras in that part of the building. I didn't mind, really. The basement seemed like a place you didn't want to find yourself in the middle of the night anyway. One particular night, my shift began as usual. I made my rounds on the main floors, checked the entrances, and returned to the security room to monitor the cameras. The first few hours dragged by uneventfully. Then, just after 1 a.m., an alert popped up on my console. The basement door was open. My stomach churned. That door was supposed to be locked at all times, and I was certain I hadn't heard the distinct alarm that should have sounded if it had been forced open. I cycled through the camera feeds, hoping to catch some clue about what was happening. But, as always, there was no camera feed for the basement, and the stairwell leading to it was empty. A mix of curiosity and duty pushed me to investigate. Grabbing my flashlight and a walkie-talkie, I made my way to the stairwell. The door to the basement was slightly ajar when I arrived, its lock visibly intact. That was my first red flag. How could it be open if no one had the key? I stepped into the stairwell cautiously. The air grew noticeably colder as I descended, my flashlight beam cutting through the thick shadows. Each step echoed eerily, and the sense of dread mounted with every creak of the metal stairs. When I reached the basement level, I hesitated. The door at the bottom stood wide open, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness beyond. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't ignore my responsibility or my curiosity. Summoning what little courage I had, I stepped into the basement. The air was damp and stale, carrying the faint smell of mildew and rust. My flashlight flickered as I swept the beam across the room, revealing rows of storage units and stacks of forgotten office equipment. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that seemed unnatural. I strained to hear anything. Footsteps, voices, movement, but there was only the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. As I moved deeper into the basement, I noticed something strange. Faint, muddy footprints on the concrete floor. They led from the entrance to one of the farthest storage units. The prints were too fresh to have been made hours ago, and they certainly weren't mine. My heart raced as I followed the trail, each step feeling heavier than the last. The footprints stopped in front of a storage unit whose door was slightly ajar. I hesitated, gripping my flashlight tightly. The dim light illuminated the space behind the door, a small, cramped area filled with old filing cabinets and broken chairs. There didn't appear to be anyone inside. I stepped closer, shining the beam into every corner. That's when I noticed something unsettling. An open, dusty box sitting in the middle of the floor. Inside was a single rusted key and a photograph of an empty hallway. The photo looked old, but the hallway was unmistakably the one leading to the basement stairwell. Before I could make sense of what I was looking at, a loud metallic clang echoed through the basement. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the room, but nothing moved. The noise had come from the direction of the entrance, as though the stairwell door had slammed shut. My blood ran cold. I was officially trapped. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was alone, locked in the basement, with no way to call for help. My walkie-talkie, which had been clipped to my belt, was missing. I must have dropped it somewhere in my panic. The thought of combing through the darkened basement for it filled me with dread, but staying put wasn't an option either. I took a deep breath and started making my way back toward the stairwell. The basement seemed to shift as I walked, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. My flashlight flickered again, its weak beam barely piercing the gloom. As I neared the entrance, the air grew colder, and I felt an almost imperceptible pressure around me, like I was being watched. I tried to shake the feeling, focusing on the door ahead. When I finally reached it, I found the door locked from the outside. I banged on it, calling out in desperation, but the sound of my own voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. At the far end of the basement, near the storage units, a dark figure stood motionless. Its outline was blurry, almost as if it were part of the shadows themselves. I didn't wait to see what it would do. Summoning every ounce of strength, I hurled myself at the door, slamming my shoulder against it until it gave way. I stumbled into the stairwell, my heart racing, and didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the security room. When I checked the camera feeds, there was no evidence of anyone in the stairwell or the basement. The next morning, I reported the incident, but my supervisor dismissed it as nerves playing tricks on me. Maintenance claimed the door hadn't been tampered with, and the building owners denied any knowledge of the strange photograph or key I'd found. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that basement, or who or what was down there with me. Working the night shift as a security guard at an industrial plant could be mind-numbing, with hours stretching endlessly in eerie silence. The plant was vast, its machinery standing idle, like sleeping giants under dim, flickering fluorescent lights. My routine was simple: patrol the grounds every hour, check that all doors were locked, and ensure no one was loitering where they shouldn't be. The plant was supposed to be empty after 9 p.m., so I rarely encountered anyone during my rounds. It was around midnight when I first noticed something odd. While making my way through the factory floor, I spotted a light on in the break room at the far end of the plant. That was unusual. By now, everyone should have clocked out, and I distinctly remembered switching off that light during my earlier patrol. I tried to brush it off as forgetfulness, but the unease settled in my chest like a heavy weight. As I approached, I heard a faint sound coming from the room. It was subtle, like the shuffle of feet or the creak of a chair. Peering through the small, grime-smeared window in the door, I saw someone sitting at the table, their back to me. They were hunched over, as though engrossed in something. I couldn't make out any details in the dim light, but the figure's presence made my stomach twist. My gut told me no one should be here. Knocking on the doorframe, I called out, "Excuse me? This area's closed for the night." The figure didn't respond, nor did they react. A strange silence followed, amplifying the sound of my heartbeat. Gritting my teeth, I stepped into the room, but just as I moved closer, the overhead light flickered violently and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and in the split second of blackness, I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair being pushed back. When the light flickered back on, the room was empty. The chair where the figure had been sitting was now slightly askew, and a single glove lay neatly on the tabletop. Confused, and more than a little unnerved, I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the glove on the table. It was a plain, work-issued glove, the kind every employee at the plant used daily. There wasn't anything outwardly unusual about it, but the fact it was there at all, left behind by someone who seemed to vanish into thin air, had my stomach churning. I forced myself to step forward and pick it up, half expecting it to somehow still be warm. It wasn't, of course, but the moment my fingers brushed the fabric, a faint click echoed through the room. I whipped around, my flashlight beam darting to every corner, but the break room was empty. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the small space. Nothing moved, but the oppressive feeling of being watched crawled over my skin. I left the room quickly, eager to return to the safety of the brightly lit main floor. Once there, I made a beeline for the security room to check the camera footage. I rewound the feed to the moments before I approached the break room. Sure enough, the light had switched on, seemingly by itself. Then, as I scanned through the video, I saw it. A shadowed figure, distinct but blurry, sitting at the table exactly as I'd seen moments before. But the moment I stepped into view of the door, the figure leaned forward as though standing. And then, it was gone. One frame, it was there, and the next, the chair was empty. My breath hitched as I replayed it, looking for any sign of where the person had gone. There was nothing. Worse, I noticed something strange in the footage. On the frame where the figure disappeared, the timestamp glitched momentarily, just a single second out of sync. It was as if time itself had stuttered for a brief, inexplicable moment. And yet, the rest of the feed was perfectly normal. By this point, I was shaken, but still trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a prank or a technical glitch. Surely there had to be a logical explanation. Still, I couldn't bring myself to return to the break room. Instead, I decided to complete the rest of my patrol quickly and stay near the security room for the remainder of my shift. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling of being watched, as though eyes I couldn't see were following my every move. Hours passed uneventfully, and I almost convinced myself that I was overreacting. But as dawn approached, something happened that shattered any illusion of normalcy. While reviewing the camera feeds one last time before clocking out, I noticed movement on the monitor for the break room. My stomach dropped as I saw it. The glove. It was no longer on the table where I'd left it. Now, it sat on the chair, neatly placed, as though someone, or something, had carefully moved it. The footage offered no answers. There was no sign of anyone entering the room or touching the glove. One moment it was on the table, and the next it was on the chair. It was as if the camera had simply skipped over the exact moment of the change. I didn't report it to my supervisor. What could I say? That a glove had decided to move itself? I clocked out and went home, determined to put the night behind me. But the glove wasn't done with me. The next evening, as I entered the security room at the start of my shift, I found it lying on my desk. My blood ran cold. It wasn't supposed to be there. Someone or something had left it for me. I quit the job the next week, unable to face another night in that plant. To this day, I can't explain what happened, and I've learned to live with the unsettling truth that some mysteries are better left unsolved.